Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I am excited to be here with you today, as I'm excited to be here with you every day. And actually, I am excited. I am. And today happens to be my Friday, so that means I got the next 2 days off. So that's always nice to know. But if I'm being honest, I don't know, maybe excitement isn't necessarily the word I would use for today, because honestly, I'm still feeling very discomfited from yesterday's post. That is not something I normally do, right? And it's not so much. I'm not saying that this is a positive thing for me. I think it was good that I sort of pushed myself to do something like that because I don't like to share about myself, and that's not okay, right? Like I should freely share about myself for sure. And I guess that's not true. I don't mind telling many stories about my own life and my practices and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to that kind of trauma stuff, I don't know, that felt really hard to do yesterday. And so today I'm dwelling in a lot of self-compassion and I'm trying to cultivate this sort of this support for myself, or not trying to. I am cultivating this, and I only say not trying to because I practice this and I know how to do it, right? So I'm cultivating a sense of just kindness for myself and understanding for myself and support for myself, right? So I hope some of you enjoyed that episode yesterday. I hope it benefited you in some way. I would welcome any comments or feedback you have about it. But I'm glad it's over too. So today, I want to talk about a very it's funny. It's like I want to say it's an unemotional topic because it is kind of unemotional because we're just going to talk about very scientific stuff. We're going to talk about brain neuroplasticity, right? But in fact, it is completely emotional, right? Because it is the place where our emotions start is in our brain. And so, and I was inspired to do this episode today because I'm reading this amazing book. It was written just a couple of years ago, I believe. So you've all heard me mention Dr. Richard Davidson here before. He likes people to call him Richie, so I do. So this book came out in 2012, okay? And so Dr. Richard Davidson with Sharon Begley wrote this amazing book called The Emotional Life of Your Brain. How its unique patterns affect the way you think, feel, and live, and how you can change them. That's the key statement right there, how you can change them, or that you can change them, right? Like that's the big takeaway here, because that, even today, is a pretty recent discovery, a pretty new concept, right? The general understanding of the brain, right, until about 1993 or so, like that, somewhere in the early 90s, mid 90s. Until that time, neuroscientists and psychologists and any other people in the scientific field who study the brain, they believe that once you reach your full age of maturity, which is around like 24, 25 years old, that was it. Your brain was then static, right? Every connection that had been formed was your unique brain, right? And every connection that was formed, it was there. It was never going to be broken. And there was no new connections ever going to be made. And aside from, losing brain cells due to aging or damage from whatever, whatever damage, vehicle might have happened, that your brain really was not going to change at all, right? So, thankfully, and this is very encouraging, that scientists now understand that the complete opposite is true. In fact, there's a quality of the brain that's called neuroplasticity, right? Neuroplasticity is effectively saying that the brain can change, like in its structure and its function. It can literally change. It can be molded, okay? And so what does this molding? It's not brain surgery, right? It's experience, but it's also thought and intention. Okay, and this is really, really exciting. Okay, and this is why I wanted to. Dr. Davidson had a bit of a different sort of angle on this in this, and it was like on page 10, right? Like it's like literally at the very beginning of the book. It blew my mind because the way that he explained it was a little different from how I've heard it explained before many, many times. and in a way that I want to tell you about. Okay, so neuroplasticity is often it's often illustrated in some very basic sort of and really cool experiments that have been done, right? And so, well, not really experiments, but just studies of people who do things in their lives, and they've shown how these people change their brains. Okay, so for instance, two very famous ones, right? A neuroscientist back in the I don't know, 90s, did an experiment where he took a bunch of virtuoso violinists, right? People who were, and I don't know if it was a man or a woman who the scientist was, but a scientific group, a group of researchers took a group of virtuoso violinists, right? Now, when you're a virtuoso at something, that means that you're as expert can get, right? Like that's the top of the top, right? And so with playing the violin, right, on a virtuoso level, right, it requires some very, very fast and very precise movements of the fingers, so specifically the left hand fingers, right? This hand is just doing, it's more of like a wrist arm kind of thing, right? But this is all about the fingers, right? Like it's very, but it's not just about moving them fast. Again, it's about moving them very precisely and in specific timing. Very, very difficult what we're talking about here, right? To be at that level of virtuoso, right? And this applies to guitar, violin, piano, harp, whatever, it's very, very difficult when you get to that level, right? And so what they found was when they did brain scans with functional MRI, which is the MRI that kind of shows the pictures of the brain and can show where activity is and different, different areas of the brain. So when they studied, they did scans of these virtuoso violinists, and what they found was the specific area of the brain that that controls the left hand finger movements, the motor control of the left hand. They found that those people had a bigger area of that part of their brain. Right? There's another fascinating study, and this one is like when I first read this a few years ago, many years ago, in Search Inside Yourself, the book about mindfulness, the mindfulness program at Google. This blew my mind. Okay, so in London, a city of 25,000 streets, literally more than 25,000 streets in the city of London, right? In order to get a license to drive a black taxi cab in London, right, which is that's their, like I grew up in New York, we have yellow cabs. In London, they have black cabs, right? And in order to get a license to drive one of those cabs, right, you have to pass a very, very difficult test, right? And this test is you sitting across from somebody with no map, with no notebook, with no GPS, with no assistance of any kind. And the person in front of you is going to give you a series of addresses. Pick me up at this address, drop me off at this address. How do you drive there? Now, in the city of London, again, 25,000 different streets. And a lot of them, I mean, I think I talked about this the other day. Maybe I was just talking to somebody about it. But a lot of these streets are very, like some of them are one way, some of them are not one way. They're very, ancient streets that are twisting and turning through this city in like maddening detail, right? And so in order to pass this test, you have to give turn-by-turn instructions from one address to another, just from your mind, just from your memory. People have been known to study for this test for up to 4 years, okay, just to pass this one test. It's an extraordinary, incredible level of memory that you have to cultivate for this. You basically have to memorize every permutation of 25,000 streets. I mean, that number is staggering. Right, and so they took a group of the London taxi drivers, people who'd been through this process, and controlling for their age and their demographic and all that kind of stuff, original nationalities and stuff like that, culturally and all that, controlling for all that. Right, they compared to a group, a control group, and found that the people who had done this laborious studying of these 25,000 streets to get this license, they actually had a larger hippocampus than the control group, right? Now, the hippocampus is that's the part of your brain that is responsible for memory, right? It stores, it collects short-term memory, stores some of those short-term memories into long-term memories, and then anytime you're trying to remember something, like if I ask you right now, try to remember, your first car. Right, the first car that you ever had. Try to remember the color of the interior. You just used your hippocampus, right? That's how it works. Now, the other thing is very, very fascinating about the hippocampus is that this is the one place that we know where neurogenesis happens, which means that we create new brain cells, new neurons in our hippocampus, right? So we actually grow this hippocampus through use. Pretty fascinating. Okay. Now those are studies that I had heard many times before, and there's other ones too, right, that show the same thing. And it's seen all in nature as well, right? Like birds of prey, right, have a stronger visual cortex in their brain, right? Whereas an animal like a deer who is reliant on its hearing will have an increased size and amount of neurons devoted to its sense of hearing. Right? So these are all things that we've known for a very, very long time, right? But the thing that Dr. Davidson, my pal Richie, points out on page 10 of this amazing book, and I recommend this book to everyone, right? Really gives a good, I mean, you can see that I've got, my typical Post-it notes all throughout. I've got underlines, I've got, notes in the margins, all that. It's a fantastic book. And one of the things I love about it, and I knew this before I even started the book, is that Dr. Davidson explains things in very relatable terms. Sometimes some of these books, they're hard to read. It's like you have to take a break every few pages just to like collect yourself. At least I do. I'm not a very, high education person. I didn't get a lot of practice that way. So my brain does not operate that way, right? Somebody who studied law, for instance, could bang through these books with no problem at all because they've practiced. That is another example of neuroplasticity, right? Like my brain does not process, scientific writing because it's not used to processing scientific writing, right? But the more I read, the easier it becomes, right? It's another example of neuroplasticity. But here's a really couple of fascinating ones. And this is fantastic because I've actually used these studies in other contexts, right? To cite these studies in different contexts. But it really applies to neuroplasticity in just a fantastic way. So thank you, Dr. Davidson. I'm so... I love you, man. So anyway, a couple of amazing studies, right? So there was one study done at, I don't know where it was done, but it was a group of piano players, right? And not piano players, but beginners, like people who had never touched a piano before, right? They had two groups. Right, both groups came into a piano studio. Everybody sat down at a piano, and they were all taught. And again, no experience at all. Nobody in this group had ever played any musical instrument. Right, and so they taught them a very simple 5-finger scale. Right, could be just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Something very, very simple. Right, extremely simple. The kind of thing that a piano teacher would teach you the first time, just to get you used to, tickling the ivories. Right. You're not tickling them yet, just hit the ivories, right? And so they taught them this very simple scale. And then for the next couple of weeks, right, they had, half of the group came back to the piano studio every day and practiced that for X amount of time. I don't remember exactly the amount of time. But the other half was instructed to stay home and without moving their fingers or trying to do anything physically, just close your eyes and imagine yourself going through the motions of not doing it, but just picturing yourself doing it. Okay. And a few weeks later, they all come back, right? And there were brain measurements done on these people before and after, right? And what was shown is that the part of the brain responsible for that thing, right, was increased more in the people who had not actually been at the piano practicing, but the people who just visualized it, they grew that part of their brain just within a few weeks, just by thinking. Okay. Similar experiment was done at the University of Connecticut, I believe it was, basketball team. they were taught a new way of doing a foul shot, right? Foul shot is when you stand on the line and you just, nobody else is, everything's still and it's just you in the basket, right? It's a very internal thing. Nobody can affect you. So it's just about you and the basket, right? And so it's a very important thing because, shockingly, there's professional basketball players who can do that less than half the time. It's like, you would expect that an expert basketball player would be able to sink that thing every single time, but there's so much going on in the nervous system, right, that's not always the case. So even high level basketball players still get taught this very basic thing, right? Because of course, the more of those foul shots you can get, the more games you're going to win, right? So, so the University of Connecticut did this process, right? And I'm pretty sure they also had a neuroscientist, working with them and doing brain scans and stuff. I don't know that for sure, but what I do know is that these people were all shown the same basketball thing, right? Okay, you stand this way, you do this with your arms, you do this with your back, you specific, right? And they were drilled in it over and over and over, right, over the course of a day or two, right? And then half of the basketball team was asked to go to their dorm rooms or to the library and close their eyes for 20 minutes a day or whatever it was and just visualize themselves doing this basketball shot. Just keep over it. Boom, 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 right? Just visualizing, right? Not actually moving yourself, but just literally just picturing it, right? The other half came to the gym for the same amount of time every day, shooting the buckets, just doing it, right? And you know what I'm going to say, right, is that the half that was in their dorm rooms came back and was more effective. Now, I don't know for sure if they did a scan on that, but the fact is, right, that this shows how the thoughts alone can change the structure of your brain, right? And this goes back to the intention that I talked about the other day. You might recall 2 or 3 days ago, I did an episode here where we talked about setting an intention in the morning, right? Because this is not limited to, shooting a basketball or learning how to, get around a city with a lot of streets or playing a piano, right? This is not, it's not about those things, right, necessarily. I mean, maybe that is for you. Maybe you really want to become a great pianist someday. Well, here's a great indication that you can, right? It's not something that we're born with. It's something that's created through practice, right? And that's true with anything in life, right? Like a lot of times, I know for me, a lot of times I went to art school when I graduated high school. I went to college that was an art school, right? And for me, I was studying photography. I had done a bunch of sort of photography classes outside school when I was in my high school age, and it's something I thought I wanted to do for my life and stuff like that. So I went to an art school and studied photography, right? And around me, were just these amazing artists. Like there was people who went on to work for Disney and The Simpsons and, all these animation people. There's people who are very famous artists right now who went to this school with me, and these people, I would look at what they do and I'm like, gosh, I wish I could do that. Like I wish I was that talented. And I didn't know this then. I wish I had, because I would have just spent the time. But it's not that somebody is born with it. Right? I mean, we are born with a certain level of capabilities, right? And there's certain, if your parents were artists, right, then you are going to naturally have more of a propensity towards that stuff, right? That's a genetic thing that happens, and that's something that is real and foundational, and yes, that's true. Like if there's somebody there who had, artists in their family, they're more likely to be innately talented than me, right? But that's only part of the story, right? As I talked about the other day, by doing the art, by just practicing doing it, you're actually creating the brain that is able to do that art, right? Now, it doesn't just stop with art, right? It doesn't just stop with doing things. It also includes your emotions, right? Because as you practice one way of emotional response, right? For instance, if every time I can't get away from my own traumas here. When I was growing up, right, one of the things that my dad was all about was telling me how kind of foolish I was for things. Like there was one time where I was sitting in my room, I was about 13 years old, listening to music because I had 15 minutes before I had to leave for school. And I was just sitting on my bed listening to music. And he came in my room. He says, "Isn't that stupid to just sit there and listen to music? I mean, don't you think you should be doing something while you're listening to the music?" And he walks away. That's my dad. That was like, yay, encouragement. But the thing is, right, that because that happened over and over and over again, right, my emotional brain, because remember, your emotions always start in the brain, right? They function in the body, but they start in the brain, right? They start with your perception that causes an emotion, right? And so because that happened over and over and over again, right, what do you think? My brain automatically goes to places where, oh no, you're foolish, you're not worthy, you're insignificant, you're inadequate, all these things, right? So these are natural automatic responses on an emotional level, right? Automatic emotional responses is what I should say, right? And so what that means is, as an adult, right? If somebody, and this actually happened to me, not too, even a couple of years ago, right? When I first moved to Denver, I took a job with Amnesty International, right? And just standing out on the street and canvassing people walking by, trying to get them to donate to the. We were talking about the Myanmar, the Rohingya in Myanmar who are being persecuted and genocide and everything. It's still going on, But I was bringing awareness and trying to raise funds for that at Amnesty International, which is a great job. It was fun. It was exciting, and you're doing something really important. So it was a great job, right? And here in Denver, it was a great way to get to know people and kind of get to know the sort of vibe of the city and stuff. So I loved it, right? But there was one time where the guy who was like the manager of my group, right? Like we were sharing an office with another company or something, and I was like finishing doing something on the tablet that I had to do and stuff. And the guy says, "Art." And he was just being like friendly and saying, "Hey, Art, you ready? Come on, we got to go," kind of thing. And he was being friendly, but I took it as like, no, I'm almost done. Sorry. My reaction was so much that he actually took pause, and he came over to me and says, "Art, just so you know, I will never, ever, ever yell at you for anything. Like, you don't have to react the way you just did." And that is because my natural, automatic, emotional response to having somebody call my name in like a raised voice was, "Oh crap, I'm in trouble. Oh my gosh, I did something wrong." Right? It's there was nothing other than just yelling my name, right? And so that is something that has changed over the years with my own practice of neuroplasticity, because that's the thing. As we practice and as we set intention, the structure and the processing of our brain changes. And with it changes our emotional, like what Richie Davidson calls the emotional style. That's what this book is all about. He says the emotional life of your brain, but it's about the emotional styles, right? There's a certain tendency that we all have. There's 6 different aspects of emotional style. When I'm done with the book, don't worry, we're going to do a full episode on this, right? But there's different areas, right? Like your resilience, your outlook, your your ability to read people, in social circumstances. I'm not going to remember all of them right now. My brain's going to go blank. But anyway, we'll get back to that. And so the idea, though, is that, for instance, like I just said, that ability to see people's emotions, right? To be able to read someone and like social context. I think that was another one. And so so that's something that, you might not be good at right now, right? And that's okay. The point is that as you practice it, right, as you start to set the intention and work on it, your brain physically changes so that it becomes a new, normal, automatic tendency of your mind, of your processing. So this is very exciting news, right? And even more exciting is that we're talking about the neuroplasticity of the brain, right? Well, there's a similar kind of aspect of your genes, and this is called epigenetics. Okay, so neuroplasticity, epigenetics. Epigenetics is basically describing neuroplasticity of your genes. But what it means is when and again, this is purely by experience, right? So you have genes in your body that have been passed down. I mean, some of your genes are passed down from, 200 million years, right? They've not changed, right? And so, but specifically, you have a very small percentage of genes, like 0.001% of your genes are specifically taken from your specific ancestry, right? And so you're going to have certain traits that your ancestors have had, right? So, for instance, a general, fear or something like that, right? Who knows what it is, right? But the idea, though, is that gene that is responsible for that thing, and this also includes, genes that would be responsible for certain illnesses, right? That within your own lifetime, you can impact that, what they call the gene's expression. Right? So in other words, just because you have the gene for breast cancer, let's say, right? Because your mother and your grandmother both had breast cancer, right? So that means that gene is in your DNA, right? In your chromosomes, right? You have that gene. But if you are able to control your stress and live, just take care of your body, but that doesn't mean that you've affected anything that's the cancer itself, right? You're actually, by living a life without stress, because that definitely impacts your genes, and by living a life of, let's just say there's certain things you can do in your life to kind of down regulate that gene for cancer. Okay. And so just by doing certain things in your life, you can prevent that from happening. And the way it works is that you build this sort of non-DNA protein that goes on top of that gene. So it just gets like blocked. It just can't come out. It's amazing. It's fascinating stuff. And again, that's also another science subject we'll do, but that's going to take a little bit more studying on my part because this is very, very complicated stuff, right? But the idea, though, is that